Jonathan Gibson, a political commentator at Young Voices UK. What do you think? Because the irony isn't lost on me that this is the first female head of the Metropolitan Police being forced out by a man for her failures in tackling many things, including misogyny. Was it the right thing to force her out?
Absolutely. And I think whilst it's very easy to criticise her and look at all of these really, really deep-rooted structural, cultural problems of bullying and harassment in the police service, the fact is that it's cultural. And so the idea that simply you can remove someone, bring in some sort of saviour and completely change the entire nature of the police service, to me, it just seems slightly naive. I'd agree with Sir Peter Fahey, who was the former chief constable. So I think she did certainly have failures. She certainly didn't take the concerns of the British public seriously enough. She did carry on towing the line that things were improving when seemingly they weren't. However, the problem of this cultural sort of bullying, misogyny, sexism, the Sarah Everard stuff is just absolutely horrific, but it precedes her as well. And so making change in that sort of really, really contained environment is an incredibly difficult task and something which I don't envy the person who's going to become the new Met Chief after her, and I'm not sure that they'll necessarily be able to easily do a much better job.
Can I ask Jonathan, if and I pointed to this earlier, a woman, so female, gay, openly gay, if somebody with that background who fits that criteria, if they can't kick out homophobia and misogyny, then who can? Who could take over and do a better job than somebody who would be best placed, you could argue, to understand sexism, to understand homophobia?
I think it's a balance, because on the one hand, the fact that she's female and the fact that she's not a straight white man, for example, would imply that she would naturally, for example, care about these issues more, right? And she would naturally not simply allow it to pass. But on the other hand, in order to tackle these, you also need a certain level of competency. Just because, for example, you're a woman doesn't mean you're going to be necessarily incredibly effective at tackling sexism in the police force. And it might well be that you might get some men who are more effective at destroying the sort of deep-rooted systemic sexism in the police force. So whilst on the one hand, obviously she is going to be more likely to care, but on the other, you could say that, and I would agree certainly, that she has been incredibly ineffective in many ways in actually trying to take an active stance, even though it is very difficult, because whilst you can possibly do more on the people coming in, the people with the recent cases, she hasn't done enough.
Jonathan, do you think this has been the best week for Boris Johnson in weeks, because there appears to be less focus on Partygate? The appetite seems to be diminishing, and we could be getting to a place where actually people might not care, and which is the place Boris Johnson wants us to be.
I think whilst it possibly has been a good week for him in terms of there has been less focus, I don't think it's a dead horse yet. I don't think we can discount it. There'll be more developments with the police investigation, and there's stories in terms of what we just mentioned. There may be even Priti Patel is sort of having to be involved in appointing a new commissioner, and that's interesting because it could potentially be a conflict of interest for Parliament and ensuring that Boris Johnson doesn't get involved as he's currently being investigated. And as the investigation develops, I think people continue asking questions. Dominic Cummings recently hinted that there are actually lots more images, and the one that was just described is only sort of one of many, and there's far better ones, as he put it.
Well, I don't know if he can talk. He could be in any of those images, right? As he's
That's
always
very
been
true.
in one we've seen. Anyway,
That's very true. But you saw, in December 2020, when he claimed there was no Christmas party, only to be shown up in the video of his secretary laughing about the wine and cheese party. So I think people's anger definitely was very visceral, and I don't think people are simply going to forget about this and move on. Many of his MPs have made clear that they're not giving this up, and were he to be fined in particular by the police, I think he very well may be a dead horse, if not completely removed. He would be in a very, very difficult position. So I think that it's not over, this story, and I think there's more which will be revealed.
Indeed. Jonathan Gibson, a political commentator with Young Voices UK.